I'm sure that most of you are Gen Y millennials of one sort or another, and we'll have some Gen Xers here, and maybe a baby boomer or two. But even within any of the generations, the older half and the younger half are very different from each other, and I'm sure you've experienced that already. So let the conversations begin. I want to start with giving you something to talk about. We'll get you all talking to each other. We have a very short time to be together today. You'll find that an hour goes very quickly. If we had 2 hours or half a day, it would be even better for having the conversations, reporting out, really getting into talking about some solutions. But my goal for today is to be able to answer as many of your questions as we have time for. I really want you to ask questions. In the handouts that I gave, there's my contact information, and I really want you to feel free if you have questions or stories for me. I love getting stories, to contact me, and I really would be happy to hear from you. So realize that you have that resource. I also have a huge website. I have a monthly newsletter. Anybody who wants to be involved in any of those things, our LinkedIn group and so forth. And I decided to say that right up front rather than leaving it to the end. So either turn around if you need to form your group. This is going to be a kind of straightforward question that I'm going to ask. And one person, please take down the notes, and then we'll have somebody report out from each of the tables. Then we'll get into some of the other things. But I'd like each of you to share with whoever it is you're sitting with, or anybody else, an intergenerational challenge that you are either currently facing, have in the past that you've had to address, whether it was successful or not, and you're still grappling with it, or something that you're anticipating in the future. Either as a student out in the workplace, whatever, just focus though on work, not between parents and children and siblings and all of that. We want to focus on work. Okay, so put a list of those kinds of challenges together so we can see what everybody is thinking about, what everybody is concerned about. Right? Okay. There's somebody writing, just choose somebody to take notes so you can report back. Okay? Good. Some communication, yeah, let's get going. Just like very checked out, like, yeah, like the people floating around the office, like going through routine classes, and because I'm so hard to get tired. And we're also leaving a little early, but I'll ask you this. How many of you, whatever generation or age you are, have felt ageism in one way or another? Because it happens from the younger end as well as the older one. I mean, much more on the older end, but I'm always saying to them when I speak to people in the radical age movement or something like that, remember that the younger people are feeling it too, and we got to get rid of all of that. That's one of the purposes of having all of these cross-generational conversations, which I'm all about. All right, just very briefly about me. You heard I am a Cornellian. I was undergraduate government major, history and art history minor, have a master's in city and regional planning, and certificate in dispute resolution from ILR, which I did years later in New York. I feel, though I am obviously a boomer, that I am cross-generational. I strongly identify with 3 generations, really, in the workplace, the boomers, the Xers, and the millennials. I haven't worked with enough of Gen Z, but we'll talk about them a little bit, because the people who are freshmen and sophomores here are, sort of that. Just at least by birth years, which are pretty fuzzy anyway, and I will say something, about that. But I believe that if we don't have all of the generations understanding each other, collaborating, working together, that our businesses, our communities, and our world is in a lot more trouble than we think, and we have enough problems, as everybody is aware of. And I'm an optimist. So I'm an optimist that doesn't like to be disappointed, but I'm an optimist, and I think we are going to get together. And I see that there's a lot of hunger from the younger end and from the older end. And when I do these cross-generational conversation day things or shorter forums and all of that, people just really get into it, and they really want to learn about each other. And I think so much of the hype that we get in the media about, the dissension, focusing on the differences. There are differences, and that's why we're going to talk about it, but they're not differences that can't be actually appreciated and used to everybody's benefit. Because one of the big problems is that if you were not born or alive at a certain time when people were forming who they were as people, it's very hard to know that. But where I come from on this, the premise of that is that what it takes to be successful in our work and our lives are the kinds of things, or at least it is equally or more important than the kinds of things you can go and search for on the internet. There's tons of data, we're all deluged with it. But are the relationships, what you can get from talking to people, learning their perceptions. And so you can see where they're coming from, explain where you are coming from, because we're just not going to be all formed the same when there were different things going out in the world when we were growing up. So what defines a generation? Now we do see, and even I have birth years down there on that chronology. And that's just some kind of guideline, some kind of reference, because people will always say, well, what's this generation, what's that generation, but those are fuzzy. And we define generations really not by those birth years, but more by the commonality of economic, political, social, and cultural events that people were going on around them, or they experienced at some time in their life. What's your formative stage? Well, you're forming all the time, but let's say high school and college age, more than toddlers who don't remember all that well what was going on. So that's essentially it. And if you come from a conservative family, a very religious family, even it used to be that in this country, if we're just talking about this country, that people were sort of ahead if they were in terms of times and new things and the trends and musical and cultural on the coasts, on the East Coast, the West Coast, then the Midwest and the South. Now that gap is closing much more quickly because we have instant communication. So all over the world, people are getting something, learning everything, hearing everything just about the same time. So people are coming together a lot and learning all those things more. But that really is what defines it. So there are differences in the hierarchy and the position. People will behave differently, or should, if they are managing other people who might be the same age. And I think one of the things that you see in universities, as well as in the workplace, is you have veterans who are millennials, but they have been through all this training or have seen combat, so even more so. So they have a lot more leadership training usually, and more life experience that can be life and death very, very much. And they're going to be different. They're going to be different as your classmates, as the people that you're teaching, as the people that you're working with. And we have to come to take advantage of what they bring more than to say, oh, well, we're different. How are we going to deal with that sort of situation? So that's another thing. And another thing that really I think trumps everything, sorry to use the word, it existed before it was blasted out on buildings and everything. Maybe I should say surpasses, is personal behavioral style. People are their personal behavioral style, which is partly core personality and partly the environment that you're in, really surpasses any of the aspects of diversity in terms of whether it's age, whether it's gender, sexual orientation, the way people think and the pace that they're at, and even things like attention span, and whether you're more extroverted or introverted or ambiverted, which I only knew about within this year, which is somewhere in between. So now I think that I'm an ambivert that's much more on the extrovert side. But whatever it is, there are all these many variations. And I'm sure you've experienced all of that. So those are all kinds of things to keep in mind. And the generational aspects are just one of, a collection of tools that you can use in dealing with these things.
You mentioned baby boomers are planning to stay longer in the workforce, and I know it's sometimes a choice and sometimes not even a choice for them, and that this will have implications for leadership positions everywhere from academia to corporate organizations, all of this. Most of the room are millennials. How do you recommend we navigate this? Because we're not hopefully going to be the ones saying, hey, move on over. But as an academic who studies generational dynamics, I actually get told by a lot of older professors, oh, you should write on us and how we need to make space for your generation. And
interesting that you're hearing that. But it's interesting that you're hearing that. I was wondering if there would be resistance, and I'm sure there is in some cases.
I think it's going on as a debate right now in publications like the Chronicle of Higher Ed, where there was an editorial last year on selfish boomers not retiring, which I have lots of issues with, to be clear. But how do you advise the millennials in the room to navigate those dynamics?
Okay. First of all, let me say that the next generation that seems to get overlooked so much, although I talk about it because I don't think it's fair, the next generation in age and experience to take over leadership would be Gen X, right? But they seem, first of all, it's a much smaller generation. And you can see from the numbers there, which are very approximate and changing because people die and we have immigrants who are coming in, usually on the more the younger end. But at any rate, there still is, you have the boomers are a big generation, Generation Y millennials are a big generation, Generation Z probably will be, although most of their parents are Xers and there are fewer of them, but they're having more kids than the boomers did. So it's, you know, and demographics really are a destiny in a lot of ways. So you hear in some cases the millennials being an impatient generation. I do agree with that. I don't think it's a myth. And wanting to sort of leap over the Xers, especially if you don't have a lot of Xers who are really very eager to become leaders and spend as much time working as they see that the boomers have. So again, I think these things need to be a conversation, and we see two trends really out there. There's a push in a lot of companies, and it may, you know, and when I say companies, I really mean any kind of organization, but some of them still do have mandatory retirement ages, and people are forced out, and you can do it legally or illegally. So, for instance, in law and accounting and any partnerships, you are still allowed to have mandatory, which you can't in government and you can't in a lot of other places. So some of that is, you know, trying to ease people out, or to step down. You can, you know, we want your expertise, we want your knowledge, we want your contacts, but, you know, give somebody else a chance and transition your knowledge and train them. And sometimes there's an issue about that if you don't pay people for transitioning. So once you do that, you're no longer valuable to the organization, and we deal with that issue a lot in the legal industry, which I worked in a lot. So that the counter trend, which is not as large one yet, but we may be seeing, is that organizations are realizing that they really need to retain people who know what they're doing very well, have been there for a long time, have knowledge, contacts, relationships, all of that kind of thing. And we don't want to, and I mean, I think you know this from Cornell, that Encore program, and people who have retired, they're trying to get back here at least on a part-time basis. So how many of you have managed people who are older than you are? We are going to be seeing, obviously, a lot more of that because of the boomers sticking around. And that can be a very awkward situation. But again, it doesn't have to be. You know, we're getting into a communication thing and cross-generational communication. I think the thing you need to do, and if you can start it face-to-face and have more of that, it is better, even if you're not all that comfortable. And I think a lot of the younger people are less so because there's been less face-to-face. Although there's a trend going back, the surveys now are saying that the younger millennials and Gen Z really want to have a lot more face-to-face, person-to-person kind of conversations. And have the guts, the confidence to bring up some of these, you know, and say from the beginning of the working relationship, or if you're already in it, how do we work this out? You know?
I guess when we were talking at our table, we were talking about how to address when people disagree with you, how to address, you know, people who are your mentors, how do you address them so there's, you have respect and yet are able to convey your opinion.
Okay. So one of the things that I think, and this is sort of related also to the question I was given beforehand about being on a sort of same level, sort of like peers, about the same age, but maybe one person is a TA and the other one is a student that they're teaching, or even the difference between graduate students and undergraduates. This is a situation that commonly happens out in the work world in all kinds of workplaces. When somebody that you have been working with is a peer on the same level and gets promoted and you don't. And so this is your friends. How do you have sort of creating distance that wasn't there before, and respect and courtesy? So the first thing is what you can do for yourself, which is your mindset, and to convince yourself that you are really very capable. You are now in an authority position, and show that in your body language, in the way you talk, your tone of voice, not up talk, which, as I was saying to Renee earlier, we're even hearing up talk is, when you sound like you have a question mark at the end of everything, which is confusing anyway. Are you asking a question or are you making a statement? Is this what you believe or not? But I hear this from even men in their 50s on television. I mean, it's gotten just so widespread, but it's not a good thing, particularly for how to communicate and to command respect. So think about those things, and also, make it clear. How do you want to be addressed? If you are teaching, if you are an assistant professor, and do you want to be called professor, or do you want to be called by your first name? We've gotten very casual as a society. When I went to school, when Renee went to school, the professors didn't usually wear jeans. I mean, it's hard to tell from one thing or another. It used to be a lot clearer. That's how things were. There were sort of ground rules that people grew up learning, and they either heard it in school or they heard it in their families. And I don't think that's discussed a lot. I don't know. Have you in your family, before you came to or went out to work as interns or or regular full-time jobs or whatever it was, did you have these discussions about this with your parents? Did they tell you this is how to behave in the workplace? No. Probably they were so busy, and also because when they got into the workplace, when they started, it was assumed, it was clearer. You sort of picked it up by osmosis, and the senior people wore suits, and they were addressed by Mr. and Ms. or whatever it was. Now it's very different. And I'm saying to people who are complaining about young people that they hire, they come in late and they, dress. They come to interviews all dressed very properly, and then after they're hired, they can be wearing anything. And this isn't everybody, but for some people. And I said, just think about it. They came out of school. If they didn't have early classes, they could show up, whenever. They didn't have to get up early if they were tired up late last night. Everybody dresses however it is that they want. It's pretty acceptable. And if nobody says this is not the culture in our workplace, this is not how, and people are going to see you, and certainly in front of clients and customers, you don't want to look that way, and it's better to err perhaps on the more formal side, at least for a while. And then there are other cultures, and this is true a lot in technology and a lot of startups and so forth. If you showed up in a suit, I think that's peculiar, and it makes people feel uncomfortable, which is how we started having casual Fridays and then casual everything. Literally. People I worked with people who were lawyers who went out to firms inside their clients in these new companies. And they said, they were told by their clients, don't show up in a suit. You make us feel uncomfortable. And that they go back and they tell management, well, we can't look like that. And then it began to percolate up. So things have changed a lot. We don't have those discussions from the usual sources, whether it's parents or, probably you have a little bit maybe from career services, because I know that I've even done some programs when Nancy Law was here anyway. And if you have that opportunity, go and get into those discussions. Talk to people who are in older generations that you know and find out their perspective and how you think that they think of your generation. And what do they expect, and what advice they have for you.